Jesus, we thank you that you're here with us today. We thank you that you are incredible, that you have plans and purposes for today, that it is new without mistakes so far, and we look to you for your mercy and your kindness. Father, we surrender to your will and your way today. I thank you for Erwin, Lord. I thank you for his creativity, for his friendship, for the way that you have taught him to lead and to follow you. And Lord, I pray that as we have a conversation today, that it would glorify you, that it would honor you, and that through this, God, people would come to understand their own creativity that you've put on the inside of them, how to use it, Lord, and how to actually reflect you in the culture that we live in. I pray that this would be a light in the darkness and that you would have your way. In Jesus' name, amen. Right,
Amen.
team?
So
Yeah.
Cass, on a side note, why do Christians close their eyes when they pray?
Look, because it removes all the distractions, Erwin, because when I look heavenward like I'm meant to, I actually get sidetracked by the fact that Shekinah's there and Lynn's there and all the people I love, and then I want to talk to them rather than to Jesus. So if I shut my eyes, I focus.
Because see, I spent the first 10 years of my faith life working with drug cartels, and so I
So you never shut your eyes.
closed. No, and so I developed a lifelong habit of that.
Yeah.
It drives my wife crazy, but I mean, I always had to have my eyes open just to know who would be pulling a weapon or what would be going on in the room.
I would like to say that at the end of my street, I have a fire trail that like goes through the bush, and I call it the Emmaus Road. And I walk and talk to the Lord, and I never shut my eyes when I pray on that little road.
All right.
Well, it's been a long time since we've sat opposite each other and had a conversation, Erwin McManus. You are literally one of my favorite humans on planet Earth. I can remember a moment in LA where I jumped off a plane and met you and your family for coffee, and it blessed me and fed my soul. You think left of center. You love the church. You're an artisan in the way you approach life. Creativity fuels you and your family. They're all kinds of wonderful. And so today I'm going to put 15 minutes on the clock, and I'm going to have three questions, and hopefully I'm going to talk less and you're going to talk more, and we are going to benefit from your wisdom and glean from your knowledge. I just want to say up top, before I get into my questions, I cannot believe that you're a grandfather, and I love it with everything in me. Can you tell me what they call you?
They call me Salvi, which is from being from El Salvador.
Okay.
And so I have, well, Juno doesn't call me anything yet.
No, of course.
She's only 4 months old. But she is amazing. She's beautiful. She's already brilliant. And we're so excited to have her in our life. But it is good to see you too, Cass. I wish that we were not across two continents, but one day. Yeah, but one day we'll be in the same room and enjoying each other's company again.
Yeah, you bet. What I want to know is, how did you discover that you could use creativity for or on purpose? And what has that looked like for you throughout the seasons of life?
It's so interesting. When I read that question, I immediately realized that it's one of the great assumptions in like faith life, that you have to discover that creativity has a purpose.
Right.
Because I didn't grow up in the church and I didn't grow up in faith. And so I would have never seen creativity as not having a purpose. Really, the great conflict was after I came to faith, where it felt like creativity was supposedly the enemy of spirituality. You know, but I can tell you on a real practical level, the first time I remember two different moments where creativity was just a natural part of my life. And that's when I had two little sisters, and I would have to put them to bed a lot of times when they were young. And at night, you know, people would read them bedtime stories, and they'd have all these children's books. But I would never read them a children's book. Every night, I would create stories with different characters and with different like universe, different worlds. And sometimes I would create these really tragic stories, and they would cry, and they'd say, "No, you can't end it like that." And I'd go back and change the endings. And so my earliest memories as a kid was writing stories, creating stories, and being a storyteller, and using my imagination. And with my sisters and the other ones, I started a small like landscaping company when I was around 12 years old.
A landscaping
company? And we did really, yeah. And so we did really well. We bought all of our own equipment. We went from houses to companies. We had a bank account, and I'm in sixth grade, and I'm already a business owner. And one of the things that I discovered really early is that I would go to these businesses, and they would have places where there'd be a lot of dirt and just rocks or plants. And I would design those areas, and I would landscape the rocks to have different designs. I would take different kind of rakes and instruments and landscape the dirt so it had all these beautiful designs. And none of it would last. It was all temporary, right? Because the moment there's rain, the moment
Yeah,
there's
right.
wind, all that land. But I would get more tips than our entire income for mowing a lawn or working on a property. And I learned really early on that if I applied ingenuity, creativity, some level of beauty, that it was actually, even on an economic level, worth more than just being functional, utilitarian, and getting the job done.
Wow. Okay. So no purpose.
Maybe I'm trying to figure out what the connecting point for me is, because I'm going, I think like in Christianity, in the church, a lot of times art and creativity is seen as supplemental.
Yeah.
It's what you add to the important stuff.
Right.
And I cannot think of anything that was important without creativity.
Yeah.
And so I can't think of anything that has purpose without imagination, creativity, beauty. And so maybe the part of the problem is that my thinking doesn't allow me to distinguish between those.
No, and I love that. I think it's N.T. Wright who says that beauty and creativity are like signposts that point to God, and that a world without it is pointless. Like, it's actually part of the very fiber of who we are. And I think you lead like that. I think every time I see you doing anything you put your hand to, it always has creativity and innovation and those kind of things attached to it. Like, you look for better ways of telling stories, better ways of leading people to faith, and I love it. Okay, so then what role has failure or risk played in success for creatives? And what have you learned personally that would be helpful for another generation to hear?
Yeah, I think one of the great challenges is to ever think you can do anything meaningful without failure.
Yeah.
And
It's
you can
disappointing,
ever
right?
create something. Yeah, yeah. And if you're not failing, you're probably not creating. And in fact, you're not creating. If you're not failing, you're just repeating what has already succeeded. And so I suppose the person who's working at McDonald's, who's making the Big Mac, really has almost zero chance of failing. And because you're simply repeating what has already been standardized. And unfortunately, for a lot of us, we see success as measured as not failing. And now, if you're going to innovate and create and do something extraordinary, then you know that failure is going to be a part of the formula of creating whatever is there. And so I've never ever thought of my life as separate from failure. In fact, I think one of the unique strengths I have is that I actually kind of revel in failure, and I'm not crushed by it, and I don't let it define who I am. And I actually see it as a measure of risking beyond my capacity.
How did you get there?
I think I got tired of being a coward.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And because I think growing up, I was afraid of everything. I mean, I was afraid of failure. I was afraid of rejection. I was afraid of not being wanted. I was afraid of not being loved. I was afraid of failing. I was afraid of everything. And so everything I was afraid of was a practical part of my life. And because my fear paralyzed me from actually achieving something of any significance. And so I think somewhere along the way, and I kind of have to like connect a little bit to when I came to faith in Jesus, but it was also happening before that, and where I realized, wow, I'm afraid of everything. I'm afraid of talking to girls. I was 15, right? I'm afraid of risking in sports. I'm afraid of being bad at anything. I'm afraid of actually studying, because if I study and fail, it'll prove I'm stupid. And so I realized that failure paralyzed me, not just from success. It paralyzed me from attempting anything significant, because I didn't want to be proved right that I was a failure. And so somewhere along the way, I just got, I think, disgusted with my own acceptance of mediocrity, and I just decided I'm just going to go figure out what it means to be uniquely me. And ironically, the more I failed, the more I was accepted. The more I became unique, the more I was rejected. And so the more you conform, the more people will like you. And the less you conform, the fewer people will like you. So eventually you have to decide whether acceptance or uniqueness has a higher value for you.
Wow. All right. I feel like that is really helpful for another generation of creatives, because I think that's a big question for us to wrestle with right now. Okay, my final question, and this is the one I'm most excited about, is I follow you on social media, so I watch all the time, all of the kind of things that you have put your hand to over the last season. So what I want to hear about, what are the things that you're most proud of that have come out of the last 12 to 18 months?
Well, I try never to bring anything to the world that I'm not proud of.
Yeah,
I
understand that. That's a good aim.
And it takes a long time to create things and get it to the level where you're proud of it. And I feel like it was also true with the book that I just released, The Genius of Jesus. In January 2020, I actually called the publisher and I said, "Hey, I just can't write this book. It's just not going to happen." And so I actually let them know, I'd love to give you back my advance. I want you to hold. I want you to be released from any responsibility, obligation to me. And so I tried to get out of my contract and tried not to write the book. And they did the kindest, most gracious thing that I did not want them to do. They basically came back and said, "We think this book's really important, so we'll give you as many years as you need to write this book. We just don't want to release you from the contract." And I was so disappointed because I so desperately wanted to be released from my contract and didn't want to write the book. And so I wrote 2 other iterations of this book before I ever got to this book. I had mapped it out on my walls. I write on my walls and I outline everything like that. And I just could not find the book. And I think some of it is I have incredibly high regard for Jesus. And so writing a book about Jesus made me really nervous. And I felt like the subject was really comprehensive and I didn't know how to bring it to people the way I wanted to bring it. And I was afraid that I was not capable of taking an idea that I felt was really important and essential and translating it effectively into language. So I just wanted to quit and fail both. And they wouldn't let me out. So then I just dove in and then I had an internal conversation with myself that kind of was a breakthrough moment for me. When I actually, in the middle of COVID, said how weird it is that my life revolves around someone who died 2,000 years ago. And then the other voice in my head said, "Yeah, that is really weird." And then another voice said, "What about if Jesus isn't God? Your whole life revolves around someone that isn't even God." And I know you're not supposed to have these conversations, but these are the conversations I have. And then the other voice said, "Well, if he isn't God, you can deny that, but you can't deny that he's changed you." And it's like, okay, this is weird. I can't deny the effect, but I can deny the cause. And this really like created this epiphany in my soul. And I thought, well, then if Jesus isn't God and he's changed me, then I've been changed by the idea of Jesus, which would be like a stroke of genius. And that became like the opening for me. So I wrote the entire book from a place of not believing in Jesus. I removed all the miracles. I called them mythology. And I'm able to do that inside of myself because I have so many different competing people live inside of my internal universe. And I wrote the book completely as an anthropologist, asking the question, is Jesus a genius? If he is a genius, then what is his genius? And if he is a genius, why has no one ever listed him or identified him as a genius? And then, the more important question is that genius uniquely transferable? And that drove the book. And then I just felt like I just dove into an ocean. And when I finished the book, my editor asked me, "Hey, could you go back and put in that you actually do believe in Jesus? Because, the people who believe in Jesus are going to be really offended and not sure where you stand." And that's one of the things, honestly, that drives me crazy about Christianity. It's like, if you don't fill in every blank, people start going, "You're a heretic," or "You're not one of us." And I thought the book was so fascinating, just writing it as if I didn't believe. And so then I went back and infused places where I said, and I do believe that Jesus is God. I do believe, and actually, I don't even know how to not believe in Jesus. I don't know how to see life without Jesus. So that's the irony of it all. But it made me fall in love with Jesus at such a deep and profound level that I think it's the most important book I've ever written. And so I'm really excited about it.
What do you hope people will take away from it? Do you hope that they'll fall in love with Jesus like you did?
Well, what I hope is that, Josh McDowell did a great thing talking about, Jesus, either a lunatic, liar, or Lord.
Yep.
But I always think it's interesting when people always give us like 2 or 3 options and say, those are all the options. Like, why is it in 2000 years, no one's ever talked about Jesus as a genius? I mean, we talk about Einstein and Da Vinci and
Yeah.
Picasso and Mozart, but a lot of it is because as Christians, we shoot ourselves in the leg sometimes because we want to say Jesus is God. And if anybody denies that, we get really offended. So then we can't talk about Jesus being a genius. I mean, one of the first remarks I had, someone said, Jesus wasn't a genius, he was God. I'm like, can he be both? I mean, and
Yeah. Well, it
and
stands
here's
to
what
reason
really
that
struck
God's a
me.
genius, right?
Yeah, but here's the thing: is that the divinity of God is not transferable, but the humanity of God is transferable.
Right.
And, or to say it differently, the only divinity of God that is transferable is his humanity. And so we should really unwrap that genius that Jesus revealed to us in actual history. And so what I hope people take away with it, first of all, I hope people who are not open to Jesus will be for the first time going, wow, there's a genius here I think is really important. And I'd
Right.
like to pursue that genius further. But I also think I'm trying to give our faith new language with which to talk about God and talk about Jesus. And so when the moment you talk about transformation, you're alienating every person who doesn't believe in the Bible. But when you talk about transferable genius, which by the way is transformation, then you have new language to talk about what God does when he comes into your life.
I love that. And I think vocabulary matters so much, like us defining new vocabulary for new eras, for new generations, matters for this message to remain timeless. Because I think that, like, if I've watched anything in our communities, it's that people are wrestling with that stuff and the church often doesn't acknowledge it.
No, I know. And that's part of the challenge of it is that if people ask honest questions, we feel like they're walking away from their faith.
Yeah.
And so what we end up doing is reaching a person who thinks at a certain frequency, the person who doesn't need those questions. And we end up alienating the people who actually think at a different frequency, and they think that God isn't, the concept of God is beneath them.
Yeah. When we had my son Thomas, we called him Thomas because Thomas was the first one to ask questions and to doubt, but also the first one to worship. And the doubt and worship went hand in hand. And I'm like, if your questions can lead you to the feet of Jesus and to worship, that's a pretty beautiful place to get to. So thanks for diving deep and having the courage to ask the questions and to actually listen to your publishers and to people who keep you constricted. Because we all benefit from your creativity that comes out of that. And to be honest, I love watching you because you give me confidence that we can be more than one thing at a time, that there's actually infinite amounts of creativity in each one of us and we're not limited or restricted like we think we are.
Well, Cass, you are amazing. You are one of the world's unicorns. And anytime you want 15 minutes from me, you got them.
I love it. Thank you so much.